I had in mind how the whole thing would end, but I didn't really know what the second episode was when I wrote the pilot. I just thought this is a good setup for something. There's 7 years between writing the pilot and writing the second episode. And when AMC was interested in it, we had a meeting where I actually behaved rather uncharacteristically in the sense that they said, well, what's the rest of the show like? And instead of just bullshitting and saying what I wanted it so badly. No one wanted this thing. That's also well known. I mean, nobody. And even AMC was brought up because my manager's assistant said, oh, they're looking for a show. And everyone's like, who are they? What are they? American Movie Classics?
Yeah.
They were completely interested in taking a risk. And Christina Wayne, who was in charge there, gave me Revolutionary Road and said I was trying to make this into a series. Have you read this? I hadn't read it. I read it. I was like, oh my God. This is, I'm glad I didn't know this existed. I would have never written this pilot. So I said, let me think about it. And I went back and sort of thought about it, and I went back to look for my notes. Couldn't find shit. Found this script that I'd abandoned on page 80 that I'd worked on right up until I got a job in TV called The Horseshoe. And as I was looking through it, I saw the last page in the script said, Ossining, 1960. And it was 5 years between abandoning that script because I got a job on a TV show and writing Mad Men because I had a job on a TV show and I wasn't happy. And I was like, that's who this guy is. This is the story of that guy. Every episode, I'm not gonna have a formula. I'm gonna try and give you some kind of holy shit. And that was thrown back in my face all the time. They would get the episode and they're like, what's the holy shit in this one? And I was like, I remember episode 3, I'm like, Don didn't go get the birthday cake. By the rules of television, people are gonna say, holy shit. That's the worst dad ever. Great thing about this show, because it doesn't have a genre, because it is on a human scale, is you can write an episode about something so esoteric, and that can be the theme. It can be something like, it's not, a theme is not the lies we tell ourselves. A theme to me is something like, when you get caught in a lie, you see all your lies at once. David Chase would come in at the beginning of the season with a lot more than I ever came in with. Professional story for Tony, personal story for Tony.
Okay.
Everybody else has an arc for the season. This is where it starts, this is where it ends, and it probably has a climax and a couple of beats.
Each character.
Each character. The main characters. Carmela had a story. Betty would have a story.
For each season, they had their arc.
They had their arc, and that's what you do before the writers came. And you'd sort of get a sense, and that had a theme in a way, but it was usually derived from either where I was in my life, where we left off, whatever. They're all different. They're all different. They're so different that the audience always has this repulsion to the second episode of the season when they realize that it's not the same story from last year. Came to work at The Sopranos at the beginning of the season. David Chase would have some rumination period. We'd start and he'd come in with this chart that basically had a business story for Tony and a personal story for Tony and then a story for each one of the characters. And I called Genji before I started. I'm like, I have stories for the people. How do I do it? I don't want to do that show where you check in on them every week and they just have an incremental jump. And she goes, someone will have a story, and she said, you just want to do it, just do it all at once. And David Chase's advice to me was, when you have something good, it's worth taking your time to get there. So I always feel like when I come into the beginning of the season with an image of like what year it is, where we're starting, where it's going to end, and then the writers start ruminating on it and you start getting all these other things out of it. But I usually have a theme sort of for the season. I was so delusional. I had songs, I had everything. I had a file on my iPod that was just songs if I ever got to do Mad Men. I had a watch that Don would wear. And I had story ideas. And then once they said they were gonna do it, even once we shot the pilot and the trigger was pulled, I had about 5 months left at The Sopranos, where I was alone in New York and I just thought of ideas. And I had stories that I always wanted to tell. I wanted to do that story about Israel, the first season, about the hobo. I had that idea for Roger having a heart attack and all that dialogue. I would pitch dialogue to myself. I think you can be a trans whatever and write for an African American, whatever. You can, I am not only interested in stories with main characters that are George Costanza. I know I look like him. I know I have the same personality, but I'm interested in other stories.
Yeah.
So the idea that young women like a show that's about young women, there is some truth to that sometimes, especially if it's an ignored segment. And certainly you like to see people that look like you on TV. It's a crime to not have people that look like everyone. I was like, this guy doesn't talk to anybody. He doesn't share anything. And there's kind of a tool that you use, and it's a trick, and it's gonna ruin the show for you on some level probably, but I love it because I used to see it in great movies, like Billy Wilder movies and so forth, where you find out who the character is because someone comes in and says, you're this and this and this and this and this. And they either say, no, I'm not, or they say, so what? Because no one's gonna come in and say who they are. They don't know. It's boring, it's exposition. And so to me, we have scripts still where Don has, 1/10 of the lines of other people. But in his action, you can see it. Don't stop writing. Don't try and gauge the marketplace. Write about what matters to you. And if you think you're gonna come out here and set a time limit for yourself, you should get out of it right now, because there are people who can't live without doing this. And don't let the show business part overtake your creativity. You can spend so much time trying to get meetings and hustling and trying to pitch, trying to sell something that's never gonna happen. You cannot spend all your time on that. That is way easier to deal with and way easier to focus on and way easier to spend your time on when you could be writing. Spend your time writing and then use those products and try and get that. You have to do both, but it's way easier. That's why people are always trying to sell pitches. I'm like, you want to sell a pitch because it's the easy way out. Here's an idea, you like the idea, you give me some more ideas and I'll write it. Nothing good comes out of this process. There's not one show that people like that has come out of this process. All of them have the story of a person with a strong personality like me behind it, who's written it by themselves, on spec usually, and they're fighting for it. And some benefactor, some angel comes out and says, I think this is interesting. And then it becomes interesting.